I'll never forget the sound of the locks turning behind us as we entered the psychiatric hospital that night. The metallic clink echoed down the dimly lit corridor, a subtle reminder that we were stepping into a place where reality blurred with madness. I thought I knew fear. I'd been a journalist for a decade, traveling to war zones, reporting from crime scenes, but nothing had prepared me for the horrors I was about to face. We were a group of 5 journalists, tasked with documenting the lives of patients in this remote psychiatric facility nestled deep in the forest. The hospital had a reputation. Whispers of strange rituals and inexplicable events followed its name like a shadow. I dismissed them as mere gossip, the sort of rumors that cling to any old institution. My focus was on the story, shedding light on the conditions these patients endured, the humanity behind the madness. If only I'd known that night would strip me of my own. The day passed uneventfully enough. We interviewed doctors and staff, filmed the crumbling walls and sterile fluorescent-lit rooms, and spoke to a few patients who were lucid enough to share fragments of their lives. By dusk, a heavy sense of unease had settled over me. The corridors seemed darker than they should be. The murmurs of the patients, some singing, some muttering, blended into an unsettling cacophony. Still, I told myself it was my imagination, fueled by the eerie atmosphere. When night fell, we were shown to a small makeshift dormitory in one wing of the hospital. The staff assured us we were safe, that the patients were securely locked in their rooms. Exhausted, I fell into an uneasy sleep. But it wasn't long before I awoke, a sudden jolt of panic snapping me into consciousness. Something was wrong. The room was too quiet, the air too still. Before I could move, hands grabbed me, strong, unyielding. A rough cloth was forced over my eyes, plunging me into darkness. I tried to scream, but a strip of tape silenced me. My heart pounded as I struggled, but whoever held me was too strong. My arms were yanked behind me, and I felt the constriction of a straitjacket tightening around my chest. My breaths came shallow and rapid as I was lifted off the bed and carried away. I couldn't see where they were taking me, but I felt the cool night air on my skin as we exited the building. The muffled crunch of leaves beneath their feet told me we were heading into the forest. The voices of my captors were low, nonsensical, a mix of murmurs and strange chants. I couldn't make out words, only the eerie cadence of their tones. Fear coiled in my stomach like a living thing, twisting and writhing with each step they took. After what felt like an eternity, we stopped. The scarf was ripped from my eyes, and the sight before me was a nightmare. We were in a clearing, bathed in the pale glow of the moon. Around me, a dozen figures in white straitjackets danced in a grotesque circle. Their movements were jerky and erratic, as if their limbs were being controlled by invisible strings. At the center of it all stood a man playing a flute, the haunting melody weaving through the night like a spell. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his face was contorted in an expression of manic glee. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but the tape over my mouth held my terror captive. My eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but the figures closed in tighter, their dance growing more frenzied. My captors pushed me to my knees, binding me to the ground with ropes. The earth beneath me was cold and damp, the smell of decay filling my nostrils. Then one of the dancers broke away from the circle. A woman, her long hair wild and matted, approached me. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made my skin crawl. In her hand she held a knife. My heart thundered in my chest as she raised it high, the blade glinting in the moonlight. I braced myself for the blow, but instead she turned and plunged the knife into the back of another dancer. The victim crumpled to the ground beside me, her lifeless eyes staring into mine. Blood pooled around her, seeping into the earth. I let out a muffled scream, thrashing against my restraints. The other dancers froze, their movements halting as if the strings controlling them had been cut. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the flute's haunting notes. Then chaos erupted. The dancers scattered, their white-clad forms disappearing into the forest like ghosts. The flute player dropped his instrument and fled, leaving me alone with the body and the suffocating darkness. Desperation fueled my screams, muffled though they were. I thrashed and writhed, the ropes cutting into my skin as I fought to free myself. It wasn't long before the hospital staff arrived, their flashlights cutting through the night. They found me there, bound and gagged, the dead woman's blood staining the ground beside me. Their faces were masks of horror as they untied me and removed the tape from my mouth. I gasped for air, sobbing as I tried to explain what happened. The investigation that followed unearthed a chilling truth. The patients had been planning the ritual for weeks, using scraps of paper and stolen items to communicate and organize. The staff had missed the signs, dismissing their behavior as mere delusions. But the murder? That hadn't been part of their plan. It was the act of an unhinged mind, a twist in their macabre performance that none of them had anticipated. I left the hospital the next morning, shaken to my core. The images of that night replayed in my mind like a broken film reel. The haunting melody of the flute, the lifeless eyes of the woman, the manic dance of the figures in white. They were seared into my memory, a nightmare I could never escape. I thought I'd seen the worst the world had to offer. I thought I could face anything. But as I sit here telling you this, I realize some horrors can't be explained, can't be rationalized. They linger in the shadows, waiting for the moment when you least expect them. And when they find you, they leave a mark that never fades.